All right, good morning, Facebook and YouTube. We have an exciting conversation for you today. We are going to be talking with Mikkel Thorup, and we're going to be talking about how to live, invest, work, bank, offshore, offline out of the US. And if this is something that has ever come across your radar for any reason, this is going to be a really exciting conversation for you today. So give me a moment and we'll be right back with our show. All right, good morning and welcome back to the Money Advantage podcast. This is Rachel Marshall and Bruce Wayner, your co-host, together with you today. And if you have ever considered living abroad, becoming an expat, or even investing offshore, this is a conversation that you want to be part of today. And the reason is that we're talking with Mikkel Thorup, who is currently coming to us live from Panama, correct?
Correct. You got it.
And he is with the Escape Artist. You are going to hear a fascinating backstory and his life experience that he's going to be bringing to you on the show today. And we invite your questions as well. I know this is something that we have, as we've expanded into the live format, we have added more of your listener questions into the show. So we'd love to know if you have specific questions about the conversation topic today. So if you want to travel or live overseas or invest abroad, this is the topic and the conversation for you today. So Mikkel, please correct me if I mispronounce your name. I keep looking down at my pronunciation key.
No,
every time.
you got it. I made you nervous because as soon as we got in, I made sure to tell you it's Mikkel, not Michael, not Miguel, I'm not sure. My family's originally from Denmark, so just think Danish, not Spanish.
Excellent. Well, Mikkel, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for today's conversation and to hopefully field some questions and help and inspire some of your audience.
Awesome. Well, I am going to just read very briefly a few just points from your bio, because I want to give our audience and our listeners just a little bit of background from what you are about. So number one, you are the #1 best-selling author of Expat Secrets, How to Pay Zero Taxes, Live Overseas, and Make Giant Piles of Money. So you can get that book on Amazon. Now, the reason he's been able to write this book is he has lived and invested abroad for quite some time. He spent nearly 20 years in continual travel around the world, visiting more than 100 countries. And he's going to tell you about that today. But he has not only a podcast now, he has summits, he has the book, he has multiple venues and mediums that he is helping people to understand these topics and from the experience that he's lived personally. So let's go ahead and jump into the show. Bruce, I want to make sure that I bring you into the show and have you say good morning as well.
Yeah, good morning, Rachel. This is what I really like that we do all the time with our listeners is to bring in not only different types of personalities, but different types of subjects. And I think Mikkel is going to talk about, the pros and cons of living abroad and traveling abroad. And I think that's something that people, when they start to get time and money freedom, that's really what they're kind of interested in. And I don't think there's a better time to start talking about this since we're dealing with travel with COVID and what we should be doing and what we should be thinking. And Mikkel, you don't know this, but my wife actually traveled 17 years internationally and was on Delta and American Airlines Platinum, $1 million or Million Mile Club, both at the same time. So I have some experience from her point of view, and I've also traveled quite a bit also. So I'm excited to hear it from somebody that does it, not necessarily for a living, although I think you probably make a living off of this, but that's not why you do it. You do it because probably for the adventure and meeting people across the world. And I think what my message always is, the people across the world all are the same. We all want what's best for our families. We all want the government to leave us alone. And it's amazing that we have a lot more in common than people think when they just stay here in the United States.
Bruce, you're stealing all my talking points here. Like kindred spirits. I think we're going to get along very well.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So Mikkel, can you go ahead and share with us your backstory and how did you become this person who has traveled for 20 years and been in 100 countries and lived in at least, I believe that you said 20?
Yeah, I've lived in 8 countries. I've traveled
Oh,
to
nice.
104, 105, but I've been at it for 20 plus years now. I think I need to update my bio. You know how it is. You keep going, and I got to go back and update my bio a little bit. But basically, my backstory, and I have to jump quite a bit back in time to kind of give you the full picture. But I'll try not make it not too long. But basically, when I was a young child, I was diagnosed with a learning disability, and the principal and the teacher and the resource teacher, they all came to me and they said, Mikkel, something doesn't work quite right in your brain. And what we want to do is we want to send you to a special school for special boys. And that's what they did. Every day for 3 years, I got on a little white bus and I traveled across town and I went to a new special school. The only problem was that actually it wasn't a special school. It was actually a regular school with a special class. So you can kind of imagine what that must have been like. It was 12 of us in this small class and an entire school with quote unquote normal kids. So I
Mm,
got in fights, I got picked on, I got bullied. Um, but this isn't like a woe is me story, feel sad for me by any means. I stood up for myself. I knew that this was wrong, and I really tried to remove myself from the situation quite quickly. But going into grade 7, I went back to my old neighborhood school where, these were the kids that I'd known since maybe not quite since I was born, but since I was 3 years old or something like that. And I really thought like, wow, like this is over. My life can now continue. I don't have to come home from school crying every day and 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 being so upset and so angry and
mm,
feeling so out of place. But the thing is that when I went back to this normal school, all the kids, they kind of remembered me, but kind of didn't. 3 years is a long time, especially
oh,
for a child.
sure.
And they'd start to whisper. Oh, where did he go? I remember him. Oh, he went to some retard school.
Mm,
1980s, totally politically correct, very sensitive, very, but that's the kind of thing that I was dealing with. So, grade 7 and 8, I started failing, and they started sending me to summer school, and I started failing summer school. And then I went on to high school and I started failing that. And very quickly I decided, you know what, this is not for me. I don't like this. I'm not doing well in this environment. And at 12 years old, I stopped going to school. And
mm,
at 15, I officially dropped out. And this wasn't like, oh, I transferred to homeschooling or something like that. No, I just refused to go. And it's funny now, at 37 years old, I realized that this is really the beginnings of my libertarian journey. I peacefully removed myself from the situation, something that I knew was wrong, and then forged a new way for myself. So
mm.
not shortly after that, I started traveling. And I remember my father, when I was growing up, had always told me the greatest thing he ever did in his life was backpack and travel through Europe. So for me, like, it only made sense. Like, okay, if this was the greatest thing you ever did in your life, like, why did you only do it for a couple of months? Like, why didn't you base your life on it? Of course, I didn't really understand until I started traveling myself, and I started traveling internationally as a teenager. First with my father, and I could see what he was talking about, and then afterwards solo. And when I got out there, I had the most amazing feeling. I really felt like I had found like my peeps, my people, this expat
Your
community, this
tribe. Yeah.
traveling, my tribe, this was the place that I'd been searching for my whole life. I met these amazing human beings from every corner of the earth, and I learned so much. And then I started reading and researching about different cultures and different foods and different language and different everything. And it just became an obsession of mine to understand the world. And, at this point, like we mentioned earlier, I've been at this for 20 years straight. I've circumnavigated the planet more than 400 times. I've lived in 8 different countries. I've visited 104, 105 different countries. Um, you know, I'm Canadian with Danish heritage. My wife is from mainland China. I met her in Germany. We got married in Africa. My daughter was born in the Middle East, and now we live in Latin America in Panama. So like when I say like I'm an expat and I live an international life, like it is in my bones. Like I don't even consider myself a Canadian anymore. And I think that the term, citizen of the world is kind of cliche, but I mean, I am the least Canadian you will ever meet. I couldn't even fit in there. Like I like the really different stuff. I like the really out there places. I've been to North Korea. I've been to Iran. I spent 2 months in Colombia, in 2002 or something, where it was still a very unsafe country. Now it's beautiful, and it's just, well, it was always beautiful, but it was a lot safer now. Same with El Salvador. I was in El Salvador almost 20 years ago, and they'd just come off civil war not many years before that. And I like putting myself in difficult situations and challenging myself and learning from that. And that's gone from the personal side and also the investing side, which I'm sure we'll touch on today. So that's kind of a long answer to a very simple question, but I hope that makes sense.
Well, I think the very first thing that comes into a person's mind that's listening to this is, well, Mikkel, that's great, but you got to have some money to be able to travel around the world and so on and so forth. He must be independently wealthy, and he doesn't have to worry about these things. So how do you
all right,
how do you do that then? And how have you done this? And what were the trials and tribulations along the way? And what were the...
Absolutely. And those are legitimate questions. Those are legitimate questions. I will come right out front and say, I do not have a silver spoon. I was not born of privilege by any means. I started working in farms when I was 12 years old. I used to pick the ragweed out of bean fields. And I would do that for 8-10 hours a day for, I think, $3 an hour, $4 an hour. I did a lot of babysitting when I was 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, stuff like that. And as soon as I could, I got a job and I worked at a grocery store and I started saving up money. I was not going to allow the lack of funds to stop me from following my dreams. So yes, right now I do well for myself and I travel with my family and we stay in 5-star hotels and it's great. But I mean, when I started out, I was backpacking. I took 18 months through Central and South America and hitchhiked. I had a big red backpack, a jar of peanut butter, a tent, and I just went, like I wasn't going to let anything stop me. And that having to go through those difficult things really built character. I think that a lot of the challenges we're having right now is we have perpetual children all around the world. They go on, they have everything handed to them. And I don't mean to make this as a rant, but a lot of people, they have everything handed to them. Then they go through school, the family takes care of everything, or even worse, they get into a ton of student debt. Then a bachelor's degree is no longer sufficient. So then they have to do a master's, then they have to do a PhD and I was reading some statistics the other day that said new graduates with a bachelor's degree is something like 60% of them have no prospect of work. And it's like, that's just so terrifying. But I went out there and I started creating value and working from day one from a child. So when I started traveling, I just continued that. And I just kept looking at problems that I could challenge or I could solve. And, nothing was paid for me. I really did do this on my own. But, if I lost everything tomorrow, I really wouldn't allow that to stop me fulfilling my goals and fulfilling my dreams. So I think that a lot of people can make excuses, but I'm a big one for personal responsibility.
I love that. And what's really interesting is that you mentioned school wasn't working for you. You dropped out or you peacefully seceded from the school system. Now, you clearly have a tremendous amount of knowledge and education. At this time, we're talking to a very learned person. How did that journey happen for you? Where did you decide to become self-taught and how did you go? I believe you're reading 100 books plus a year. How has that happened? And then how has that served you in your life?
I think that, I don't have a definitive answer, but I would say that I do have a curiosity. Now, I believe that I actually believe that public education actively suppresses creativity and curiosity. I think because I was not in the system for a very long amount of time that I still have that curiosity. At 37 years old, I am still massively curious. I know so many adults who left school, who left studies, especially extended studies, and will never pick up another book in their life. You know, they have like a pain point when they associate reading with like work. For me, reading is like enjoyment. Like I love learning about new things. Like I think it's just so interesting. So I think that's just a continuation from traveling. Like my favorite things about traveling are like sitting in a cafe and like people watching, going to a museum, learning about the history. I like to see how things are different. I like to see, you know, like people so always have these negative connotations, and they're like, you know, some backwards country, or, you know, they think that, you know, Canada, the States, UK, France, Germany, you know, we do things right. We do the things the right way, but these other countries, they do them the wrong way. I'm like, that's not the case at all. You know, there is reasons that countries do things, and people and cultures and history. There's reasons that happens. But I mean, you can't just like have a passing glance at it and then see, you know, you really need to dive in. And like for a lot of the countries I've been to, I did spend, you know, 2 days there and be like, oh, I know this country. I wouldn't claim to know any country. But, you know, for example, I was 2 months in Colombia in 2002, 2003. It was 2 months in Morocco in 2001. I was 5 months in Guatemala, 8 years in Abu Dhabi in the UAE, 3 years in Australia, a year in Singapore, a year in New Zealand. I lived 366 days in a Native American community in the Canadian high Arctic, volunteering at a crisis line on a suicide hotline. Like that type of thing teaches you stuff, you know, that you're not going to get through public education. Either you're going to need to read stories and books of people who have actually done it, or experience things yourself. Or the third option, which is also one of my favorites, which we can get into, is mentorship. I am a massive fan of mentorship. I have a number of people that I work with. People ask, well, how did you learn the taxes? How did you work the legal? I have a mentor. Like I have people that I talk to every single week who are lawyers, and I ask them a lot of questions, and then they give me the answers, and then I try to help them with their business and with the things that they do, and I provide value to them. You know, I think that this is excellent. You know, a good way to learn things.
Well, I love that you're bringing in multiple elements here. One, the curiosity and creativity of childlikeness in many ways is what has allowed you to explore and learn so much. And then just being a student of the world and a citizen of the world, almost as you had mentioned. So let's jump over now for somebody who is thoroughly inspired now, myself and probably our listeners included. How do you make this a reality for those of us who have established lives in the United States? We have jobs here, we have our money here, we have our family here, but we have this dream or this calling. Somehow we want to experience the world in at least some capacity that you've described. Maybe not that we want to go live abroad for the rest of our lives, but how does somebody make that mental leap? And then I'd love for you to walk through, what does it actually take in terms of thinking about having your account offshore, or needing visas, or having an additional passport, just the things that maybe you would need to think about if you were going to start this life towards being an expat.
Sure, of course. That's a ton of things to unpack, but I will do my absolute best.
You can give a high level overview.
I think that we could probably talk about any one of those things, especially like the residencies or the passports for an entire episode. But let's try to do the brief version. Okay, I will start by answering that I believe that every person on planet Earth has some magical place tucked away in their brain about where they would love to travel or go or experience or live in. You know, there's that one place in their head that they're just like, they're so curious about. Now, whether you have told that to or shared that with your spouse or your brother or sister, your mother, father, your kids, I don't know. But I bet that most people listening today have that one place in their head. So my invitation to you is just go try. because really you can think about what is the worst that is going to happen. And I have this saying that has just been a guiding light in my life for, I don't know, 20 some odd years. And it goes like this: it all works out in the end. And if it doesn't work out, it's not the end. And when things get challenging and they get hard and you don't know what to do, you just need to remind yourself it'll all work out in the end. So if you're worried, you're going to move to France and then you don't speak the language and you don't know where to go and you don't know anybody, and it's okay. It'll all work out. Oh, but if I come back to the States and I won't have my job and then my beautiful house and blah, 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 it's okay. It's going to work out. You'll get through it. Human beings are incredibly resilient, incredibly resilient. Do I think that you should just sell your house, sell all your belongings, throw on a backpack and just take a one-way flight somewhere? No, that would be irresponsible of me. I don't know you. I don't know your situation. But I mean, there are small steps that people can take right now today to build on a skill set. And I would argue that traveling, especially international travel, is a skill set. There will be small micro things that you will learn along the way, things that you've never thought about today. You're not going to learn them from a textbook. Yes, go online and read blogs and listen to podcasts and things like this. But at some point, you are going to need to do it. And you will never have a good enough understanding until you actually go through it yourself. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Like driving a car, you can't figure it out unless you're behind the wheel.
Yeah. And I think that...
I'm sorry, Mikkel.
No, please.
So if we can get some like specifics from my travel, I resonated what you were saying. Like, everybody always says, well, you don't want to go to France. They're rude to Americans. And I've been there a couple of times and I've never experienced that whatsoever. It's the most wonderful people around. But then you have to also experience things, like you said, like how do you, in the United States, we don't have a great train system, but in Europe, the train system is absolutely wonderful. But there are some challenges with buying the tickets. But then once you do it a couple of times, you kind of figure it out and you ask people, other travelers, you ask other people from that country, and this is the part that I love. They love to help because they're human beings helping another human being. Human beings are basically good people. And
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yes, you get the people every once in a while that you got to worry about pickpockets and you got to worry, but you cannot allow yourself to be frozen in that fear. So what are other things like that, examples that you could give to the listeners as far as little tidbits that you would pick up?
Okay, well, I want to continue on with the thread that you just mentioned. And I remember when I was in Colombia, like I said, this was a very long time ago, but there's this country that has so much natural beauty. Like, it is just unbelievable how much natural beauty they have. They've got the Caribbean and the Pacific. They have the mountains. They have the Amazon. They have like everything there, plus culture and food and everything like that. But it has a terrible reputation. Like, really, especially at the time, was the worst. It was just all you could think about all you heard was Pablo Escobar and drug cartels and things like this. And then, of course, the FARC and the paramilitaries and the guerrillas. But I mean, I remember one time I was totally lost. I had no idea where I was going. And I asked some older gentlemen, like, how do I get back to the Candelaria? It was a district in Bogota. How do I get back here? In my not very good Spanish at the time. And normally what you would expect people to do is they would just give you some directions and they would say, okay, go down 5 blocks and turn left or whatever, and you'll be fine. This guy actually got on the public bus with me, rode the bus with me, got off, took me for a cup of coffee, walked me to my youth hostel, said, thank you very much. And then walked back the direction we had come from. Like, he was not going in this way. He totally just stopped what he was doing and was curious about me. And at the same time wanted to show how much they had to offer. And, it's been 20 years and I still remember that so clearly. And I just want to parrot what you said. You know, people are inherently good. And I don't care if you are tall, short, fat, skinny, black, white, gay, straight, LGBT. It doesn't matter. People are inherently good. This is what I've learned after 20 years of traveling. People want the same things. They want a roof over their heads. They want to be loved. They want a meal in their stomach, and they want to protect their family. And it doesn't matter where you come from. And you will see this over and over and over again. People are inherently good. I've traveled to what some would call the axis of evil, and I met some of the most beautiful, caring, amazing human beings ever there, you know? And like in 20 years of traveling, the only time I was ever robbed was in Canada, where I grew up. Okay. I've never been violently attacked outside of when I was a child and when I was in school and things like that, also in Canada. I've never been scared for my life in Africa. Like, we drove through South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe. I was never scared through any of those countries. I never had a gun pulled on me. I never had any of these things that people are so fearful of. I didn't get kidnapped in Iran like people thought that I would. Like there's just so much stuff that is not based on reality. And once again, I know that you guys are asking for like very specific things that you can do, but I want you to understand the bigger picture of what the world is really like. Is there bad people out there? Yes, absolutely. But there's bad people, down the street as well. If you walk around drunk at 4:00 in the morning in, I don't know, pick a city in Canada, the US, like, I don't know, walk around Los Angeles at 3:00 in the morning drunk. Sure. and like, do you think that's going to be a safe environment? No, that's, you have to have your head about you. You got to have your head on your shoulders. Like, it doesn't matter really where you are, So
that's really, really good that you're sharing just this perspective and philosophy even about the world, and not being a fearful person going about your decisions. Because if you let fear make your decisions for you, or you don't go into a situation because you're afraid of what may happen, that's not the space we want to be living in, to have this abundant, joyful, flourishing humanity and doing the most good. I also love that you just brought those core elements of what people really want: the roof over their head, the love, caring for their family, taking care, protecting their family, and having food in their belly. I think that really that common humanity uniting us all is just really, really important. And so again, we could go so many directions with this conversation. And I know I opened a huge can of worms with that question earlier. And I think maybe you were even trying to differentiate. If you're going to conceptualize this potential travel or living abroad, maybe you just want to travel there first. Maybe you just want a vacation before you decide you want to actually live somewhere.
For 2 weeks and see what it's like 1 month. With a lot of those things, you don't need a special visa. You don't need a passport. You don't need an offshore bank account. None of that stuff is necessary. Really, if you're a US citizen, okay, there's been some changes with the COVID. But I mean, outside of that, if we just talk about normal life, you can go to the majority of the places that people here are going to want to listen to. Okay, there's going to be a couple of countries that you'll either have to have special visas for or special permission for. But I'd say 99.9% of the places that you want to go to on a temporary basis. If we want to talk about permanent basis, that's a whole other ballgame. We can talk about that. But on a temporary basis, to go for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that, most countries you can go to, and with very little trouble.
So if you're thinking, okay, there's this travel, this experience abroad that I want to have for my family. Maybe somebody has already experienced that. Now they're thinking, let me think about investing offshore or offshore accounts. And I know this is a completely different direction, but number one, why would somebody want to consider diversifying outside of the US? And what would be some steps that they could take to begin thinking about that?
Absolutely. This is a great question. So a lot of people believe in diversification. I believe in diversification. I just take it to a very different level than a lot of other people. So traditional diversification is, you're going to have 3 or 4 different mutual funds. You're going to have one that's, high growth, one that's, medium, and one that's going to maybe pay out dividends or something like this. Maybe, you'll have something risky in there, like a couple of apartments or something. This is your diversification. Unfortunately, all of those things are fully correlated, 100%. And I'll tell you why. Okay, first, if you're doing it all in the United States, then you're politically, they're all correlated. So what happens on Twitter, is going to affect, your portfolio. Like one person can go out there and send a tweet. All right. I don't like that. I think that's terrible. Second of all, you're doing everything in US dollars. US dollars is currently the reserve currency, but we don't know how much longer that will be for. We have a lot of challenges going on, not challenges, but a lot of things going on with Russia and China. They're now trading oil amongst themselves. The US has tried to stop this with many other countries. Look at Libya. They wanted to start trading oil for gold. We all know how that ended. But diversification, you can't just be in the United States trading in US dollars. So when I do diversification, I try to diversify through geographics, through political, through currencies, through time. I traded options and derivatives for 7 years. I think that time is very important. You can also get time with bonds and with different type of instruments, so you don't have everything coming to fruition at the exact same time. And if you hold all of your assets in one place and you do have some type of a problem with the government, whether that is founded or unfounded, I can't say. It's not my business. But I mean, they can seize assets. Like just go into Google or whatever and type in, asset seizures and what happens to your money when the police department or when a government agency seizes your assets for suspected crimes. You don't even need to be convicted a lot of times. They can freeze your bank accounts tomorrow for just suspecting you of something.
That's very key. That a lot of people don't know that it's you're guilty, and then you have to prove your innocence with these type of things.
Yeah, I work with an accountant who works in the offshore space as well. And I remember a couple of months ago, he was telling me stories about a couple of his clients. And these were American expats who lived overseas, married someone overseas, had their kids overseas, had a house overseas, and came back to the States. One woman in particular I'm thinking about. She came back to the States to visit her sister. And when she entered the US and got off the airplane, there was government agents there waiting for her. And she was suspected of owing US taxes. Suspected. You have to understand that Americans are taxed on worldwide income. They're not taxed on where they live. They're not taxed on where the money is generated. Uncle Sam wants a piece of everything you always do. And what they did was they confiscated her passport. And she had no backup travel document. So she was literally a prisoner. And it took months to sort through this. And it turns out she actually did not owe any taxes, because when they look at what they suspect, they're not counting any deductions. So if you're a small business owner, you have certain deductions. Everybody knows this, if you have kids, if you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, there's certain deductions. But if they consider you or they suspect you owing more than $50,000, they can confiscate your passport. So I think diversification is not just your investments. It's not just your retirement fund. It's also yourself. Having that plan B, having that backup plan, I think is really, really, really important and not talked about enough.
I love that you shared the diversification, because we would also say that you need to be diversified across asset classes, not just varying levels of risk within all paper assets. So
Correct.
You're broadening that perspective of where we'll say there's paper assets, there's your commodities, there's your real estate, your businesses. You want to be diversified across that within what you know and control. But at the same time, you're saying, let's even step outside of that and diversify politically, geographically, and with your currency as well. And so when did you start thinking about investing outside of the US? Was that at the same time? I mean, you were 12, I think you said, when you first started traveling. So how did that come about for you?
Well, I was 12 years old when I stopped going to school.
Right.
I was
Okay.
15 when I officially dropped out, and I was probably about 16 or 17 when I started traveling internationally.
Okay.
I got into investing like not at that age by any means. I was just a dumb kid just running around, wanting to see the world. And I mean, one thing leads to another. So I can't tell you like an exact point where I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to be an investor. I know that people like Jim Rogers had a big influence on my life, who I was fortunate enough to have on my podcast and have now talked with him several times. I liked his way of looking at the world, and he follows what many would call Austrian School of Economics, which is what I follow. I don't believe in central planning. I don't believe in Keynesianism. I like that type of investing. One thing that you just mentioned that kind of just triggered something in my brain about the different types of assets. Yes, like you can go out there and you can own commodities and you can own stocks and you can build your own stock portfolio. But to go back to the diversification, and I use this as an example all the time, but look at a company like Nestle. If you own Nestle and it's, and if it's in an ETF or a mutual fund or, on the New York Stock Exchange or something like this, you actually own it in US dollars. So although it is a Swiss company, you're really not diversified internationally at all, because it's still in the US dollars on a US exchange. So if you want to own something like that, why would you not own it in Swiss francs in a European brokerage house? Like that's the kind of, like, for me, logical thinking. Like I want to own things in Swiss francs. I want to own things in euros, and well, maybe not euros at the moment. They're having the crap beat out of them. But I mean, as an example,
Right.
British pounds, Canadian dollars, New Zealand dollars, like different types of currencies. My wife is from China, like I mentioned earlier. We own apartments in China. Talk about uncorrelated in her small city. She likes to say her small city of 5 million people. We own apartments there in RMB. It's like, that is not tied. Like that is about as far as ways you could get from the US stock exchange or a US mutual fund or a bond fund or something like that. Does it make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And this is just a fascinating conversation. I mean, from here, I would love to have you tell our listeners about your podcast, your book. I know you just recently had a summit as well. You're doing a lot to really help people understand these concepts. I know you have a blog. Share the work that you're doing and how you help people to either make this leap to living abroad or investing abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run a website, a blog called Escape Artist. It is the oldest and largest offshore website in the world. I took it over about a year ago. We've seen tremendous success over the last year. We do a daily newsletter with that. Send me daily, 5 times a week, something like that. Which is free to sign up for. And I do encourage your listeners, if you go to escapeartist.com, you'll see opt-in forms there. You can receive the newsletter. Every day we talk about second passports, investing internationally, offshore banking, offshore incorporation, different things like this. And then on that, we get into specific topics. So I might write a 1,000-word article about how to get residency here in Panama, where I live, or get a second passport in Portugal, or how to buy a house in Belize. Those are really in depth. I guess with our talk today, what I really want to do is inspire people. I want people, I'm hoping that like the whole bunch of little light bulbs go off in people's heads, and it's going to start this curiosity, and you go out there and you start Googling things and searching for things. Yes, I have a podcast. It's called the Expat Money Show. We've done nearly 100 episodes over the last 3 years. Like I said, I've had Grant Cardone. I've had, Jesus, who else would you guys know? Jim Rogers, like I mentioned earlier, tons of big people in
Mm-hmm.
the expat space. If you don't really know the expat space, you might not know, but lots of New York Times bestselling authors, lots of
Oh,
CEOs,
excellent.
business owners. Mike Cobb, who I believe you've had on your show, was on my show
Yes.
as well. Super smart individual, very
I
good
think
friend
you
of
mentioned
mine.
Doug Casey as well on
I've
your
had
show.
Doug Casey on. I've had Richard Mayberry. I've had just a ton of people who I find are really inspirational.
That's excellent. So I love that you are opening again this can of worms even wider. And you're talking about there's so many different concepts, whether it's residency or second passports or living, or you mentioned offshore and corporations or moving a trust offshore as well. So there's a lot to be explored in this space. And hence, this is why you're helping people really to be able to navigate that. So you also have a book. Tell us about the book.
Okay, my book was published about 2 years ago. It is still quite relevant. What I tried to do was make a lot of the content evergreen. Yes,
Oh,
some of the
excellent.
numbers might have changed, but say, for example, you wanted information about getting a St. Lucia passport. It's in there, but, contact us and we'll, maybe it's not X dollars, it's increased because of inflation by a little bit. I'm not sure. But I cover 15 different chapters, each chapter about a different thing that we've kind of talked about here today. So for example, a chapter on offshore banking. And this will really give you a good framework to start from if you want to go offshore. And I would say the only difference between going offshore and expat is I consider expat the personal side, the living side where you are, and the offshore space is your financial side. So the investing and the money and all of this kind of stuff, the structures. There's a lot of combination and interlinking between the two. It's always kind of a challenge to try to talk about everything, but it should be a good jumping off point. Same with this interview to lead you down a rabbit hole where you'll be able to find out more things. And that's what we did at the summit. We did 5 days at the summit. We had 27 speakers. We had 6,200 attendees at the
Nice.
summit. It was massive. I wrote over 800 emails and responded to over 800 questions in 1 week.
Nice.
So I was absolutely destroyed after that. I was working like 16, 17 hours a day.
I can imagine.
But I honestly, guys, I feel like I'm on a mission. Like I'm really I'm so passionate about this. And I hope you get that from our talk today. Like I really believe in this. I believe in humanity. I believe in our ability to choose. I believe in our personal responsibility. I don't think that government should be deciding everything for us. Like I said earlier, I am a libertarian. I am a hardcore libertarian. I trust in humanity that we will make the right decisions without interference, without extra regulation. We don't need government to do everything for us. We can do things voluntarily. We don't need force. Free market enterprise is totally the way to go. That's what 20 years of traveling has taught me.
That's really exciting. And I love that you're realizing that it's a mission and it's not only you and your personal experience, which I think is part of why we're on this earth, is to enjoy our life to the fullest. But at the same time,
Agree.
you're talking about not just living for that personal enjoyment. You're also saying, how do I have this mission to help other people live free? And if I could really just encapsulate everything that you're talking about, it's that freedom. And
Correct.
so, I mean, that's something that we and our listeners and our audience really have near and dear to our hearts as well. This idea of freedom and control of what you can control in your life. Obviously, we can't control the weather and we can't control the future, except that we can predict it by a lot of the actions that we make today. And we can decide what our future does look like. But I think when it really, everything boils down to freedom and having as much control as possible in our world. And so I love the work that you're doing and you're living both sides. You're living the expat side and the offshore side, as you said, the investing money side and also the personal side. Bruce, do you have any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share?
I have one kind of quick question, but I also want, I'll just say it on the podcast, Mikkel, I voted Libertarian the last 4 presidential elections. And a lot of people,
Joe Jorgensen, 2020.
People say, well, you're just throwing away your vote. And I'm like, no, it's my vote. You don't tell me that I'm throwing away my vote. The other thing is I know Dr. Robert Murphy personally. I don't know if you understand that name, but
It doesn't ring a bell, but
he's an Austrian economist. I will actually put you in touch with him. He
beautiful.
teaches at the Mises Institute. He's been in front of Congress before, talking about the Austrian way of thinking. So I think you'll really enjoy him. And then I'm going to send you his and Carlos Solara's book on how privatized banking really works. And
Okay.
I think you'll really enjoy that. But here's my one question to kind of finish up the show, because I do think people are going to do this like 2 weeks Airbnb or maybe a month Airbnb somewhere. And then some people are going to be inspired. Well, maybe I want to do it for like 6 months. But if I do it for 6 months, I haven't really set up my income, and I don't know if I want to tap into my investments, but maybe I would like to work somewhere. Maybe I go to Rome and I want to experience the culture in Italy. Is it possible in these different places? Tell us how you would get like a part-time job, or are there some places you can't get a part-time job, and what you would have to do that?
All right. Well, how much time do we still have left in the interview, which will judge my answer?
You can take as much time
this.
as you need, but if you need 5 minutes or so, you can go ahead and expound on anything you want.
Well, I'm happy to discuss this. All right. I will start off by explaining a couple of things that I did, and hopefully that will answer your question. Okay. When I was in Guatemala and I lived in Guatemala, I was on a tourist visa. I was in the country for 90 days. At 90 days, I left. I went to El Salvador for 1 week. I re-entered the country. I reset my visa, which allowed me to spend 5 months in Guatemala. Okay. So there I was going and I was just living. I wasn't working. Okay. I lived at a meditation center and studied esoterics. That's a different story though.
Oh, wow.
Next, I was in New Zealand. New Zealand, I got a working holiday visa. I got it in advance before I arrived into the country, and I showed up with a permit to work. Working holiday visas are usually a scheme that are open to certain countries with other certain countries. So for example, Canada to New Zealand, and maybe France to Canada, and they have I was about to say intercambio. We have interchanging relationships.
Is it due to the treaty that they sign between the two countries? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So these are usually good until you're 30 years old. So if your listeners are out there, that are less than 30 years old, you probably have some opportunities that you can go and do right now. And these are amazing programs. The idea is to go and see a new country and learn about the country and culture and history by funding your travels with working part-time. So you either work for 6 months of the year or work half days. It's not there to go and make $1 million. What it's there for is to fund your travels so you can experience the country. So that was way number 2. New Zealand, I spent 1 year there. Then I moved to Australia. I did a second working holiday visa, and I loved Australia. It is such an incredible country with amazing people and such a high standard of living for, at the time, not a lot of money. This was back in 2006. And at the end of my 12 months, when I was supposed to leave, I didn't want to leave. So I started traveling every 3 months outside of the country to reset the visa. But this time, I continued to work. I continued to keep my job and just got paid cash in hand. Now, technically, this is illegal, but I mean, 15 years on, I don't think I'm going to get any trouble for it now, coming out and saying this, but I worked illegally for a year. I would go to Fiji every 3 months, or Vanuatu, or Tonga, or Philippines, or I can't remember where I went, lots of different places. Then my company, they really liked the work that I was doing, so I got what was called a 457 skilled migrant workers visa, which basically was a sponsorship, meaning that I could live in the country, work legally, but I had to work for that specific company. So this is a new way of doing it. So it's one company, one job, the ability to work. When I left Australia after 3 years, I moved to Singapore, and I showed up in Singapore with no visa to work, a visa to be the tourist, but no visa to work, and no job prospects. And they had a 30-day exit the country and re-enter. So I would go to Johor Bahru, JB, which is you just take a little bus across the bridge, go over to Malaysia, and then come back. It took me 10 months to find a job. So I burned through my savings. in 10 months and finally found a company who would sponsor me. So this is different. The other countries I entered into with a visa. This one I got someone to sponsor me. I do not recommend this way of doing it. This was very difficult. It was the only time in my life I actually felt quite sad, not being able to work and produce for myself. I think that's why we have a lot of problems in the world, is because people are not able to work or not allowed to work, I could say. So I don't recommend this. After that, where did I live? Other places like the Arctic and everything was Canada. So I went back to Canada, although a different part where I grew up. When I moved to the UAE, it was a different story. I had a company who recruited me, flew me out to the UAE for an interview. I spent a week there. They put me up for interviews, and I took a look around and decided that I wanted to be in the country. And then they sponsored me. This is a good way of doing it. I spent 8 years there. Now, the last way that I've done it is I moved to Panama. Panama, I have a visa to work, a visa to live, and I am not tied to a company. I actually have an economic visa, so I have a visa for my own business. Although I've been an entrepreneur and I've been doing businesses for years and years and years, even when I was on other visas, this one here, I can do basically whatever I want. And there's massive tax advantages to being in Panama, which I know we definitely don't have time to get into today, but maybe another time. So that is a really roundabout, journey around the world of different ways to get visas. Applying before you arrive, applying when you arrive, being a tourist, being sponsored. That kind of outlines it. I like places like Panama where I have full control over what I do. If I wanted to, I could go get a job at, I don't know, the hairdresser or something tomorrow, and I'd be legal to do that. And if I wanted to change 2 days later and I wanted to go work in an office, I could, or I don't have to work at all.
So you again brought up another very interesting idea, and it was the idea of working for someone else's company while you're abroad versus owning your own company. And so at this time, do you own your company in Panama, or is it owned somewhere else?
Well, that's private information.
Oh,
I do own a company. I do own a company in Panama, but I own several. So I wouldn't probably get into too much of like the structures of where my assets are held.
The reason I ask, and I not for that information, but does it allow you to be able to travel to multiple countries and still operate your own business in those other countries?
Yeah, because I have an online business. So very briefly with Panama, they have a territorial tax system. So as long as my money is generated outside of the country, and I'm not selling to Panamanians, I basically live tax-free here. And this is for anybody. So say, for example, you guys decided that you wanted to move to Panama tomorrow, but the majority of your clients are US based. You have an internet business, the podcast, and all the amazing things that you guys do. This would essentially be a tax-free country in Panama. Now, your US tax situation is a different beast. And there's a number of ways that you can legally reduce your taxes. I definitely suggest talking to a professional, someone who's licensed, either a tax attorney or a CPA, but, ask about expats taxes, ask about the foreign earned income exclusion, and how that works. But it'll basically shelter $108,100 this year. It goes up every year because of inflation. So most people, especially in a developing country like Panama, and I just keep using Panama as an example, but we could use any country, $108,000 US, you can have a very good life here. The standard of living, you don't need everything that you did in the States. You don't need 2 vehicles. You don't need to keep up with the Joneses. We get a giant bag of organic vegetables delivered to our house every 2 weeks for like peanuts, like for nothing,
That's so interesting. I guess the whole reason I asked is that I think a lot of people are moving into the online business space. And my first thought with that is, well, you need Wi-Fi, right? I mean, you need to have internet to be able to operate your business successfully.
Everywhere in the world, you are going to find amazing internet like this. You won't have any problem there. I promise. I've been in backwater Africa and had high-speed internet. So,
Oh, that's
I mean,
fabulous.
there's a huge group of people who do digital nomad, which I think is interesting. For me, it's not what I do. I do what I would call expat living. So I move to a country, I incorporate myself into the culture and the society. I try to learn the language. I have local friends. I try to be, as much as I can, one of the people there. I don't try to be an outsider. Yes, I have lots of expat friends, which I love dearly. I think it's really cool that my daughter gets to play with kids from Russia and Ukraine and Australia and New Zealand and France. And, I think that's really neat. I think it's fairly great for her. But yeah, if you want to travel and work at the same time, look up anything about digital nomad lifestyle. It's super interesting as well.
This is so fascinating. And again, I think we could have a conversation that would span a much longer time frame than the 1 hour that we had today. So I'm sorry.
Well, that's why I say I'm an autodidact polymath, is because I'm an expert on many different things and I'm truly self-taught.
I love that. And I think we can all be inspired by that exact idea. I had to look up both of those words, and I'm actually I love vocabulary. So I'm surprised I had not come across either of those terms before, but I love the idea that you are self-taught and you're curious. And that's what has opened this world to you in such a beautiful and profound way. So as we close today, I want to just remind our listeners that as we are talking about money and finances, we don't usually span into this space of living abroad. But the reason we had this conversation today is that everything that Mikkel Thorup is talking about is this idea of living a life that you love. And if we really, truly want to live a life and business that we love, there's so much more opportunity and expanded thinking beyond what we normally would conceptualize as the way to do that. And so we wanted to not only expand our mindset and our thinking and the possibility and opportunity, we wanted to think of possibly a different way of going about achieving that dream of living a life and business you love. And so what we're usually talking about is just your money. And we're talking about how to make sure you keep as much of your cash as possible, protect that, and then be able to make more. And this still fits in the same concept because we're talking about how to have more freedom and more control. So if you are a regular listener on the Money Advantage podcast, we talk about privatized banking on a regular basis. If you are interested in financial strategies to be able to have more of your money in your control, please come talk to us at themoneyadvantage.com. You can go to our calendar page directly, and the link is also in the live notes as well. So you'll be able to grab that there. And we just want to thank you, Mikkel, for coming on today, for exposing us to just something very, I would say, a breath of fresh air that we have not heard on from really any of our guests. Michael Cobb was pretty close, though, I do have to say, just because he has a lot of that same background and experience. But I love having you on the show and just letting you share your vast knowledge with us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, because I think that the work that you both do is super, super important, and I feel very blessed to be on your show. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mikkel. So in closing, if you would like to find out more about Mikkel and the work that he does, go to escapeartist.com. Is that the best way to find you?
Yeah, escapeartist.com, or check out my book on Amazon, Expat Secrets, How to Pay Zero Taxes, Live Overseas, and Make Giant Piles of Money.
Love it. And then there's also the Expat Money Show that you can find directly online, or you can get to that through escapeartist.com as well. So thank you so much, Mikkel, for being with us on the show today. In closing, please remember, success leaves clues. So model the successful few, not the crowd, and build a life and business you love.